Armored car, that's not really my thing for reasons I'll explain in a moment. But if it's your thing, you can't deny that the way to armor your car today is to look for certified armoring approved by the manufacturers, like the one approved by Ford. For the Territory, by Leandrini. How does it work? The approved armoring can be installed on a brand new car, right? So you leave the dealership with the car already armored, you don't lose the factory warranty. And here's the interesting part. You can include the cost of the armoring in the financing, and I'll confess to you, I'm someone who's always been very against armored cars, right? I'm a 44-year-old guy, so when people started talking about armored cars, which is something very common in Rio and Sao Paulo, right? I lived in Porto Alegre until I was 22, then in the United States until I was 24. And I only came to Sao Paulo in 2006, 20 years ago. And back then, armoring a car meant adding about 250 to 300 kilos to the car. For an SUV of that size, it meant delaminating windows, lots of noise inside. Technologies have evolved significantly. Just look here at the window, right? Yeah, there's a much bigger gap here than the original in the opening, but look, when I first started seeing armored cars here in Sao Paulo, I'd say this was about twice as big, right? I'd say this gap went from 2 fingers to 1 finger. Technologies have evolved, right? In these ultra lightweight armor packages, they use Kevlar sheets and so on. You can see that even the window mechanism still works, although usually slower, right? But look, it goes down quickly, the weight is higher, but if the person isn't really into cars, they won't even notice that the window is slower because the weight difference is really much smaller, right? We're talking about, like I said, in this ultralight armor from Leandrini on the Territory, it's around 90 to 110 kilos depending on some options, with protection up to level 3A. Another thing that makes armored cars much more interesting today than they were 20 years ago is that power lift gates have become really common, right? So imagine in the past a big SUV or even a mid-size one like the Territory. When you armored the big rear window, it took a lot of effort to lift it up and down. Anyway, even though I'm not really a fan of the idea of armoring cars, the fact is, with a small child, a wife living in Sao Paulo, you start to consider it. Because honestly, look at this. For example, the door is heavier. Yes, but I would say it's kind of like making your car go up 2 segments, right? The armored door on the Territory feels as heavy as a Ford Expedition door, but nothing more dramatic than that. Considering how much smaller this drawback has become, it is definitely becoming more attractive. And again, just to reinforce, this is armor certified by Ford, so you don't lose anything in terms of factory warranty, especially because why are the warranties so much better now? Or did the manufacturers start certifying them? It also has to do with technology, right? Because it was one thing to keep the warranty on a car that was carrying an extra 300 kilos of weight all the time. It's another thing to keep the warranty on a car that's carrying an extra 100 kilos of weight all the time, right? It's basically a car that, instead of always being driven just by the driver, is carrying the driver and a friend who's a bit heavier. And the Territory is really good for that, right? A very spacious car in the front, very well equipped, very well finished. Cars like this are often armored, right? A car for the family to be used every day to take the kids to school. You're talking about a car with plenty of space here in the back seat. And another factor that also matters when we look at how it has become less expensive to armor a car for your use. We need to talk about the engine, right? The era of downsizing, having turbo engines that deliver peak torque from low RPMs. Wow, here is our 1.5 EcoBoost. It makes the car take much less of a performance hit in daily driving, right? That daily use in the city, having the low-end torque from the turbo, really makes up for the extra weight of the armor. And I'm not going to talk about it anymore. I'm going to show you. In practice, get comfortable there against the big chest, the result of a lot of diet and training. That's interesting too, right? The roof is also armored, and in life, you can't have everything, so you lose the sunroof, right? It becomes a moonroof, only the light comes in here, but the roof doesn't open anymore because of the armor. The day-to-day downside surprised me with how small it is. Get comfortable against the big chest and I'll show you in practice. Let's go. Power, but after all, how's it going, deputy? Look, see how AI has made journalists' lives easier these days, right? Google, the old go-to answer source, is limited compared to what AI can do for us. Because yes, I did ask my favorite large language model to make an estimate of what changes in the armored territory, right? Because when we talk about armoring, we talk immediately about loss. Perca. Loss, guys. I need to share this behind the scenes with you. During the glorious Lamborghini Gate, when we at Acelerados dealt with some not so reputable members of the community. Brazilian automotive scene, we found ourselves facing a lawyer who was nicknamed Dr. Perca because he used the non-standard word perca for the car's loss of value in a meeting. But anyway, closing this delicious behind-the-scenes gem, when you talk about an armored car, you're basically talking about losses in performance and fuel efficiency because you've added weight. But in that old era of armor weighing 250, 300 kilos, that was very significant, right? Now, I asked Gemini to estimate the losses of the armored territory, and they're actually pretty small, right? In terms of consumption, we're talking about zero. Actually, sorry, we're talking about 3%, right? The highway fuel consumption drops from 11.2 to 11.0%. Yeah, 0%, 0%, 11. Or from 11.3 to 11.0, and the 0 to 100 time gets worse by 0.3 seconds, dropping from 10.5 to 10.8, or rather going up. What does that mean in the real world, here in practice, right? In this era of downsizing, where turbo engines have that very flat torque curve, delivering a lot even at low RPMs, right? We're here at 1,700 RPM, so when you step on it, the car still responds. I would say it's almost imperceptible compared to the non-armored car, right? Where you notice it right away is in the visibility here, right? The glass, both the windshield and the side window, they go up to this black strip here, which reduces it a little, right? The pillar, if you look here, right? Adding these two extra black strips causes a significant loss of visibility. So, for the first time in my life, coming into contact with these modern ultralight armors, the idea of bulletproofing a car doesn't seem completely absurd to me, because anyone who knows me knows I've said this many times, right? I have a spiritual issue with bulletproof cars, you know? I'll tell you a story that illustrates this. It's one of my favorite stories to tell at the bar if I were on What's That Story? On Porschet's show, this would probably be my story, which is the story of the worst ride ever. I gave the worst ride ever exactly in 2010. I had a Freelander. I liked that car. It was a Freelander one, you know? It was still a white Freelander, V6 with caramel interior. And I worked at Red Bull, which was at the corner of Tabapoa and Iguatemi, there anytime. And you would leave, right? Usually at 7 in the evening. If you left the office at 7, you were already accused of being unmotivated, but I was never like that. I always preferred to work early, not to work late. I'm a morning guy, not an end of the day guy. So I always left around 7, got some good-natured teasing from my colleagues, and reminded them, hey, 8:30, 9 o'clock, I was here, you guys weren't, right? But that's okay. And then I turned right. That traffic mess on Faria Lima, when you're leaving at 7 in the evening and turning right onto Iguatemi Street. There's still a university there today, but I can't recall which one. FMU, maybe, and we're talking about 2010, right? It was before smartphones and social media, so I was single, you know, that era when sometimes you'd meet someone at night. Santa Cruz do Sul, a hub for motorsports and nightlife in Brazil at that time. And you'd lose contact, right? Years later, you wouldn't see that person on Instagram anymore, and just like that, you wouldn't. And I'm just sitting there in traffic. Picture this. I'd gone maybe 50 meters after leaving Red Bull, turning right and stopping at the light, right there by FMU. And a girl crosses the street, and it's a girl I knew actually from parties, from Santa Cruz do Sul. And then I bam, 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 honked the horn. I didn't even know she was in Sao Paulo, let alone studying at FMU. Where are you going? Where are you going? At that time, what's the name of that place next to Villa Lobos Boa Sava? I lived in Villa Madalena. I'll give you a ride. Let's go. Then she got in the car. We turned left. On that little street over there, where the old Pussy used to be, right? Which people called Putsch, it was a nightclub. To avoid the light there on Faria Lima, so we turned left, then right, stopped at the light, and at the moment we stopped at the light, 7 in the evening on a, I don't know, maybe a Wednesday. I don't know if it was a 9mm or what, but a pistol right at my window. Music, and the guy, phone, watch, phone, watch, phone, watch. I looked at my watch, which was a really nice watch, Oakley Red Bull Racing Collection, or rather, Red Bull Racing Collection by Oakley, which I had obviously received as a gift. I looked at my phone, it was a BlackBerry Torch from work, from Red Bull. I said, look, take it, right? It's no loss to me. And then I handed it over. And immediately he, who had the gun here, waved the gun in front of my nose and told the girl, phone, watch, phone, watch. And she, very nervous, had just arrived in Sao Paulo from Santa Cruz do Sul, a woman's purse, that thing full of stuff inside, couldn't find her phone. The guy turned to me and said, tell this bitch to give me the phone. And I almost said, look, excuse me, bitch, can you hand over the phone? Of course not, she found the phone. We handed over the phone and moved on. The girl was completely shaken. I mean, obviously nobody likes this kind of experience, right? But I don't know, historically, I'm the kind of guy that when the adrenaline level in a situation goes up a lot, I calm down, right? I was there calming her down, but it's a great story. The worst ride ever, right? The girl got in the car, and within 30 seconds inside my car, she lost her phone, lost her watch, had a gun pointed at her face, and was called a bitch. In just 80 meters, it's the worst ride in history. Then you think, well, with all that, have you never had a bulletproof car? No, I still have never had a bulletproof car, right? Because it's all a matter of risk management, right? I always say, do you drive a bulletproof car? I say, no, I drive a convertible, man. If I thought that the possibility of getting shot in the face in my daily life in Sao Paulo was real, was genuine, was high enough, it's not zero, right? Playing the Mega Sena lottery, your odds of winning aren't zero. But there are 20 million people. Oops, we're not. Let's keep going here in the test car. There are 20 million people living in this crazy city, and a handful of them every day are victims of deadly robberies, right? But if you look at it mathematically, I've lived in Sao Paulo for 20 years, and this was the only time I went through this kind of situation. But more than that, more importantly, even if I had an armored car, if my Freelander was armored, we'll continue after the toll booth. Look, let's roll up the window here. You can see the window gets heavier, slower, right? But going back, everything in life is a matter of risk management, risk versus reward. I've already gone skydiving twice and I stopped, right? The chance of something happening just by skydiving is small. It's much higher than your chances of getting shot in the face in Sao Paulo. But if you jump 100 times right, you're mathematically adding risk there. Why am I saying this? If my Freelander were bulletproof, I'd have done the same thing. Do you think I'd escalate things? Go ahead and shoot to see what happens just to save my phone and watch? Of course not. And incidentally, this particular guy was so clueless, so out of the ordinary, that he ended up being featured in Veja São Paulo magazine. He was a guy who, one fine day, started robbing people, mainly looking for watches at gunpoint in broad daylight in Itaim. He racked up about 50 victims in 2 months and was arrested by the police, right? Yeah, I can assure you that in the last 20 years, the incidence of having a gun pointed at your face during business hours for those leaving Itaim and going to Vila Madalena, or leaving Vila Madalena and going back to Itaim, is extremely low, right? But anyway, that's it. Human beings have a hard time dealing with big numbers, right? Just to finish my reasoning, if I really thought my risk of getting shot in the face in Sao Paulo was high, I wouldn't live in Sao Paulo, right? That's the point. For me, the bulletproof car ultimately symbolizes that something in your life isn't adding up, right? If you really think the possibility of getting shot is high enough to justify investing in a bulletproof car, you need to rethink your life, right? Are you living with that fear every day? It's scary, isn't it? Well, let's leave Sao Paulo then, right? We like living in Sao Paulo. We're not afraid of the city. We live in a regular house and we can't stand gated communities. But anyway, humans do have difficulty dealing with large numbers, with doing this kind of calculation. And there are people who, don't care. I know the chances are tiny, but I sleep well at night. It's a matter of human psychology, and that's okay. Yeah, all that said, nowadays, there's no doubt about it. The penalty you pay for having an armored car compared to a regular car is huge, really huge. But it's much less than it was 10, 15 years ago, let's say 16 years ago, which was the only time I was a victim of armed robbery, not just in Sao Paulo, but in my whole life, right? So at 44 years old, I've already lived 15,000 days, is that correct? So the possibility there in my case is 1 in 15,000 in my experience. Yeah, so it doesn't change my life because of 15,000 days, right? I live like the other 14,999. But the fact is, if you have a deeper psychological issue, then there are people who have already gone through something more serious and have trauma, right? Yeah, the fact is that for those who like cars, it's much less of a turn-off, that's the best word, to bulletproof the car. Because the penalty for damaging the car in terms of weight, acceleration, and fuel consumption today is much, much, much smaller. And when you get certified bulletproofing, like this Leandrini bulletproofing here that's certified by Ford, you don't lose your warranty. So by not losing your warranty, you also improve the car's value, right? Its performance in the used car market. That's another point, right? The amount you invest in bulletproofing never comes back to you when you go to sell in the used car market, right? This territory costs 215,000 reais, and with bulletproofing, it's 300,000. Yeah, when you go to resell it, it's not like the car's value is still 300,000 reais, right? The depreciation on the bulletproofing is much higher than the depreciation on the car itself, right? But anyway, the violence is just a little above the world average, or I would say just a little above the world average, right? Many places are more violent than Brazil, though Brazil is still violent, right? When we look at Western Europe, at a good part of the United States, but I'll say violence in the United States is also pretty complicated, right? For example, let's do the exercise here, right? How many mass shootings happen in the United States per year? We're talking about, the last time I checked, if I'm not mistaken, it's almost 200, right? There's always a risk someone on a motorcycle might want your phone or watch. When I was robbed on Frelimo Street, it was just a well-dressed guy on foot, which is why it made the news. Yeah, a tall blonde guy who did everything on foot, there anytime. But in Brazil, unlike the United States, there's not the same level of risk of someone entering a public place or event and shooting everyone. That's a much more real threat there. People in the United States aren't bulletproofing their cars despite the risk, even though it isn't zero. Anyway, everything in life is a matter of risk management. But if you need a bulletproof car, if it helps you sleep better at night, these factory certified bulletproofing packages, which Ford has, other manufacturers have as well, and this ultralight armor technology really make the idea of bulletproofing a car much more attractive than it used to be. Those are my 2 cents. Leave yours in the comments. It's a controversial topic, right? Everyone has a very different gut reaction. For those who recently saw the comments about the Ferrari loot, we can see how gut reactions dominate the internet, right? So each case is different, and I will never criticize anyone for bulletproofing their car, because that's just how it is. I know people who have already been victims, which is something that also happened a long time ago. It used to happen much more often in São Paulo, which was the so-called express kidnapping. You spend hours of terror with someone you don't even know. And many times the person is, I don't know, on drugs, and you have no idea where that situation is going. Man, I completely understand someone who went through that, but that's the reality of owning an armored car nowadays, for example. But if I were that person, I would have left São Paulo. But anyway, to each their own. Tell us in the comments what you think about certified armoring, ultralight armoring, and the simple act of armoring a car. Leave a like on this video, subscribe to the channel, that always helps us a lot. And as always, thank you so much, take good care of yourselves, and a big hug. Let's pass a bit more here before we leave. Thanks a lot.